All right. I'm also making my own recording, so I can send you mine after if the quality is better. Sometimes Zoom video recordings are a bit grainy or whatever. So I'll
Oh,
send you mine. If you like it, you can use it.
yeah, no, absolutely. And they are, but we're on, you've heard of a shoestring budget. Well, we're on a microfiber budget here.
Yeah. So I'll send you my recording. If it's useful, use it. Otherwise, just throw it in your trash bin.
Much appreciated, Glenn. Thank you very
All right.
much. So we have Glenn Patterson with us today as part of our project. I'd like to welcome you, Glenn, and thank you very much for participating. We're going to start off, as we always do, with some background information to provide context for the bulk of the interview. So to start off, I'm going to ask, where were your parents born?
My parents were born in the United Kingdom. My dad grew up in Belfast, and my mom is from East Anglia in England, so around the town of Norwich. They both emigrated here in the 1960s, sort of a wave of British emigration to Canada, to Toronto, actually.
Mhm. And where were you born?
I was born in Scarborough, Ontario, and I grew up in an adjacent suburb, Richmond Hill, which is about half an hour, 40 minutes north of the city, right along Yonge Street.
And where did you receive your education? Elementary, secondary, and any post-secondary?
My elementary and secondary were both received. I went to school in Ontario, in the suburbs of Toronto, and I did my bachelor's degree at Queen's University. I actually have a background in electrical engineering and applied mathematics, and then I came to Montreal in 2005 for a master's degree in electrical engineering at Concordia University. And that was really the first time I learned anything about Montreal or Quebec.
Okay. And what is your occupation now and any occupations you've had previously?
There's several. I'm completing a doctoral degree at Memorial University. It's in ethnomusicology, and my research focuses on the musical traditions, media practices of Anglophone Gaspésians. So I'm in the writing phase of that as well. I work for the Quebec Anglophone Heritage Network as their digital media specialist. So I've been organizing online events on Zoom throughout the pandemic. We've started doing some hybrid events with in-person and online audiences in the last couple months. So that's the other half of what I do.
Okay. And where do you live now?
I live in Montreal in NDG.
We're neighbors, I guess. We'll talk about that later. Okay, now we're going to get into what I call the meat of the matter here. So I'm going to start off by asking, what is the best thing from your perspective about living in Quebec today?
Um, let me think on it. The best thing. Um, that's really hard to nail down. I do want to say I think I learned to appreciate living in a place where I use the word minority a bit reluctantly, but we can statistically it's true. It's kind of interesting to live in a place where you don't speak the dominant language. I mean, I do speak French and understand it, but it's not necessarily my everyday language. I actually really appreciate living here. The sort of everyday challenges of something like listening to the radio in my second language. Occasionally, when I go to a grocery store or I'm in another neighborhood, I'm having to use my French. I really do appreciate that. As well, there's a strong sense of community, and I would say the English speaking community is very tight knit, just about wherever you go in Quebec. And I do like, I guess, being a member of that English speaking community, even though I didn't grow up here. I find it, I don't know, it's easy to belong. In fact, it's sort of an anecdote. I spent 6 or 7 years living in Newfoundland, which has a reputation as being very warm. It is a very warm place. But the thing I found there, and I did try to make a run of living there permanently, is while it's super friendly and welcoming, I didn't find I was ever a Newfoundlander. I never would be because I wasn't born there. Whereas no one really questions my where I'm from or my origins here in Quebec. Especially in the English speaking community, as long as I don't know, it's kind of a no questions asked. It's very easygoing, and especially if you're sort of willing to contribute to your community, I find there's a place for you, and you can easily develop a sense of belonging. A long answer to a short question.
A lot of people have trouble with the next question, but I'm going to qualify it just a little bit. Um, I'm asking you to describe your relationship to Quebec in a single word, which I'd like you to do, and I ask everybody to do, but you're more than welcome, once you've answered the question, to elaborate on your reasons for that as well. So I don't want to limit you. So I'll ask the question, describe your relationship to Quebec in a single word.
It's hard to do that without adjectives. I want to say complicated, mostly positive. I don't know. Yeah. Okay. It's been great. I don't know. It's too hard, Dave. I would rather, even if you can get a soundbite, you probably not going to be my finest moment there. Because I don't. It's with anything complicated, there is no one word for it.
Yeah, no,
Maybe that's your soundbite.
yeah, no, it's a difficult answer to a very simple question. I understand completely. Okay, the next question is, where do you feel most at home in Quebec? For example, in communities based on language, culture, profession, or your geographic location?
It's a confluence of several. I'm very attached to Montreal. It's where I first got to know Quebec, but I've done a lot of work, and I've lived. For example, I lived in Gaspésie during my research, and I spent a lot of time in Gaspé even when I wasn't living there. So I would say I do feel like I belong to the whole province a bit. I'm definitely. I have an interest in the English speaking community, and I have friends Anglophone Quebecers all over the province. So I do feel a sense of belonging a little bit to all those English speaking communities that I've visited, whether it's, Wakefield, Chelsea, the Pontiac, Gaspésie, Chateauguay Valley, some of the townships. And like I said, the Gaspésie I know really well, Belcartier, Shannon, north of Quebec City. Um, but Montreal maybe feels most like home, I would say. But I feel like I'm somehow a micro global citizen. If there is a more globalized English speaking community in Quebec, I do definitely feel like I belong to that, beyond just Montreal or even my neighborhood of NDG.
Now, the next question is two parts, and some people have had a problem with the second part and asked me, well, who is defining the official definition of Quebec? So let me explain what we're trying to get at with this question. The official definition of Quebec is as you perceive it. In other words, it can be the government's official definition, it could be the media's official definition, it can be your peers' official definition. So that's the second part of the question, how I frame it. And so I'll ask the whole question and let you answer it in any way you see fit. First of all, how would you define a Quebecer or Quebecois? And secondly, do you think the official definition in Quebec includes you?
I think a Quebecer, I mean, linguistic nuance, when you switch from French to English, it does change a little bit. I'm definitely a Quebecer. I've lived here almost half my life now. Quebecois does have a connotation of, pure laine, francophone de souche, that kind of thing. I tend, I could, if I was speaking French, I would use the word Québécois, just because I was speaking French. But I do think when we use it, when we're speaking English, but we say Québécois or Québécoise, we're usually referring to, francophone with a long lineage in the province. It's not just about speaking the language; it's about descendants, basically descendants from a group of settlers who arrived in New France in the 17th and 18th century. So it depends what language I'm speaking of. The official definition, there's what I think the vernacular always carries more realism, more actual import in how people act in daily lives, including how politicians act and how they articulate policies. They might say everyone who lives here is Quebecois, but we know that um, some people are more Quebecois than others.
Okay, fair enough. Now, has your sense of identity as a Quebecer or Quebecois changed over the years? And if so, in what ways?
So I noticed, I just want to ask before we answer that, I noticed one of the next questions is about belonging. And to me, I just wanted to get you to disambiguate a bit on those, because to me, they're very related. And I don't know, I feel like I'll answer the same question twice. So,
Again, I'm an arbiter. I can't really comment on that other than you are free to say and repeat yourself if necessary. The questions are worded in such a way that we're trying to distinguish between living in Quebec and feel that you are belonging in Quebec. That in our minds, they
right.
can be two separate things, not necessarily, but they can be. So we're trying to make that distinction. So having said
Okay.
that, if we can proceed, I don't know if that answers your
Yeah,
question.
no, it does. It helps a bit. So the question was, has my identity changed recently?
Yes.
Um,
And if so, in what ways?
yeah, no, not really. I still consider myself a Quebecer, and I have for at least a decade, probably more now. I've been here, I think, 17 years now. I mean, off and on. I was living in Newfoundland, but I was coming back to do my research. I was, visiting friends here. Very much I've always maintained a strong sense that I'm. It's my adopted homeland.
Okay. And what are some of the most difficult things in your experience about living in Quebec?
Um, Reading Mathieu Bock-Côté. But yeah, it's the politics. It's like it's the media. Actually, my experiences with people of all backgrounds. I have lots of francophone friends. I've never had a bad experience as an English speaker. Made a lot of effort to learn French in my 20s and 30s, and I've never had a bad interpersonal experience. But I would say definitely having to read Journal de Montréal and Mathieu Bock-Côté is a I don't know. It's a frustrating experience. There's so much people like him, Mario Beaulieu as well, a member of the Bloc Québécois, currently in committee meetings reviewing Bill C-13. It's almost like he just denies that we even exist or that we have a right to exist. I just feel like they'll never be satisfied with us. So it's frustrating. So that's my maybe my somewhat glib response to that. I think yeah, that's the most frustrating thing about living in Quebec is always having your identity called into question. And then you have like the official discourse, like, oh, everyone here is Quebecois, but we all know that's not really what you mean, or it's not what's in your heart. I think it is in some people's hearts, but there's definitely a segment of the media punditry and political class for whom that's not the case.
Okay. Again, a lot of these questions are attacking similar issue from a different angle, but I want them on the record anyway. And that, you've already alluded to potentially the answer to this question in your other responses, but I will go ahead and ask it. In recent years, Quebec's Francophone majority has identified a number of linguistic and cultural threats. Which of these concerns do you share and support? And which of these concerns make you feel excluded or targeted?
Generally, I don't share any of them. Truthfully, I think um, we have to ask. I do think promoting French is a noble objective. I think where we do it is really, for me, that's where the heart of the issue is. Um, I think it should be in education and culture, and I think that's a really rich place to cultivate a sense of belonging. I think giving someone a hard time if they're trying to receive social services because their parents didn't go to school in English in Canada. I don't think that's the place to cultivate a sense of belonging. So, um, those sorts of demographic issues. I have my own demographic concerns. Having spent a lot of time with rural Anglophone communities where the average age is over 50 years old. And, the population in places like, the town of Gaspé was maybe 50% Anglophone only 45, 50 years ago. And now it's 10. So those are actually my demographic concerns. And languages, I'm concerned about Indigenous languages in Quebec and the vitality of their communities. I feel like, in a way, the Bill 101 actually did a lot more than people want to give it credit for these days for solidifying the place of French in Quebec. Um, and also creating a new francophone middle class, who I think is quite stable and vital here. Actually, if there is any concern, I do support efforts to like cultivate more francophone music, cultural products, media, television shows, especially in the age of the internet. I think for the same reason I support CanCon and its objectives when that legislation was introduced back in the 60s and 70s. I think it did do a lot to create a space for Canadian arts in public media where it didn't exist before. And I think that would be something actually I do quite support is making sure there is funding set aside for francophone Quebec productions, whether it's on Netflix, Amazon Prime, music, any kinds of broadcast media. I think that's a really sensible goal, and that's where in terms of my own learning of French and about francophone culture here in the province. That's where I do it. So I mean, I really benefit from that.
Okay. Now, this next question, it's been asked before, but in a different way. So I'm just going to go ahead and ask it. What is the biggest problem facing Quebec, and how could it be resolved?
I think practicality, labor shortage. We need people here to work. Immigration is the answer. Sorry, Legault or Minister Boulay. I don't know. Health. There's many. Healthcare is a huge one too. I think we need to focus on humans, keeping our economy afloat. Humans. Creating a sense of social solidarity, which has been greatly fractured by the CAQ government and its legislation, and its general discourse about immigrants, about Anglophones, about anyone who is not a native French speaker.
Now, the nenext question, I'm unabashedly, and with his consent, borrowing from Guy Rogers and his documentary, because it's a very effective visual tool that he used with great alacrity and success in his documentary. So I'd like you to indicate by a show of fingers on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being weakest, 10 being strongest, how strongly do you feel that the joys of living in Quebec outweigh the challenges?
Let's see. Let's do. That's 8.
Okay.
I realized the camera angle wasn't ideal.
Okay, is there anything else that you would like to say, anything at all, about your sense of identity or belonging in Quebec?
I'm not sure if we actually ever got back to the belonging questions as separate from identity. You asked if identity had changed recently, and I'd say no, but belonging definitely. I would say the election of the CAQ government and Bills 21 and 96 and the surrounding discourse throughout their entire first mandate, including on immigration, language, Um, that's definitely affected my sense of belonging. I think for the first time, really, the first time since I moved here, I have contemplated whether my future might be better outside of the province. I'm extremely attached to Quebec and all its complexities, and that includes its English speaking communities, but also those English speaking communities in relationship to their Francophone neighbors. But I have considered if maybe enough is enough. With the rise of populism throughout the Western world, it seems to be particularly strong in this province as well as Alberta. But I did get to live most of the year in Newfoundland for a while there, between 2012 and 2019. And it was nice not to have to turn on the news or pick up a newspaper and hear divisive discourse from incredibly, I guess, people with incredibly powerful pundits and government personnel, opinion makers, etc. It was really nice actually just to that not to be in the back of your mind as you go through your day to day. I really enjoyed that, and I kind of miss it. But I think overall, my interest in kind of my sense of belonging to Quebec is strong enough that I think it's resilient enough to weather that. I think it's part of the experience of being an English speaking Quebecer or an allophone is having your identity called into question regularly, depending on political expediency, basically.
Glenn, thank you very much for your contribution. Your insights have been very
Oh, there's
riveting.
something else. I realized there's something else I wanted to talk about.
By all means, go ahead. The tape is running.
No, I did stop there, but then I sort of realized, I don't know if this constitutes a soapbox or whatever. I'm staring at a camera, so I can't resist. I can't resist the urge. But I think I work in the heritage sector. I'm very I like history. I think heritage is a very meaningful part of who we are, and I think the thing I would hope people watching this, listening to it later, might just think upon, reflect on, whatever is think about maybe the linguistic heritage of Quebec and what that means. Is the linguistic of heritage of Quebec just French? I don't think it is. I think it also includes Indigenous languages, the English language, with all the complicated history that entails. It includes, our beloved allophone communities. So there's a multitude of languages that are part of the linguistic heritage of Quebec. I think heritage deserves to be supported, and it deserves to be supported not in this sort of museological sense where it's something it's a line in a history textbook or it's an artifact in a museum. I think it needs to be embodied by living people in vital communities. And I think the English speaking community is very diverse, very interesting, each with their unique history and very profound attachment to their place, physical and social, in Quebec. I've often found the attachment that English speakers have, whether it's in Montreal, the Gaspésie, Western Quebec, doesn't matter where, incredibly attached to the land or their urban neighborhoods, and all that entails. And I think that's a real resource for social cohesion. So I think that's how I think one way that we can sort of get beyond the divisiveness and the binary kind of us versus them, and having this monolithic sense of what Quebec is and what its linguistic heritage is. It's obviously mostly Francophone, and clearly that's what makes it most distinctive in North America. But let's not forget about the smaller and sometimes quieter voices.
Very good. On that note, I want to thank you very much, Glenn. I'm going to turn the recording off, but I'd like to continue a discussion with you after I've turned the tape off, because you brought
Sounds good.
point.